What's up, Redemption community? I hope you all are having a fantastic week and enjoying the early holiday season. My name is John Hendricks, and this is episode 8 of The Threshing Floor. This week's episode is all about Type 2. I'll be sitting down with Type 2 royalty Jaden Alstead and Redemption elder Tyler Stevens. Between the two of them, these guys have several placings and national titles for Type 2 categories. So we'll feed off their knowledge and wisdom about Type 2 to give you an overview and a little bit of a deeper understanding of what Type 2 is as a category and, maybe persuade you to give it a try. So without further ado, we'll get right into it. Appreciate you being here.
Welcome back.
Welcome back to Redemption. Oh, sorry.
What's happening, everybody?
Yeah, you do start every episode like that. What's happening? So welcome in, guys, to another episode of The Threshing Floor. My name, as always, is John Hendricks. We're here with Type 2 players Tyler Stevens and Jaden Alstead. Did I say it right?
You did, yeah.
So the point of this episode is going to be all about Type 2, kind of what is it, and unpacking that and seeing how it compares to Type 1 for players that don't have any experience with it. And before we get into that, we'll just kind of let these two, I guess, veterans in that area kind of speak about their experience and successes with Type 2. So you want to go ahead and go first, Jaden, since you prepared your whole resume?
Yeah, I did do a lot of research, just kind of figuring out okay, when did I actually start doing Type 2, and how did I get to last year, which was actually my first Type 2 two-player national title, which was pretty exciting. So as I mentioned last time, I've been playing the game since pretty much I could read, so it's been at least 3 years now. It's been a number of years. My first big Type 2 finish, the one that is kind of sealed in my memory, was actually in 2007 at the Type 2 only tournament. So from, I think it was 2006 was the first one, to 2019 is the most recent one. We used to always do a Type 2 only tournament in the winter in Minnesota. And so it was kind of 6 months apart from nationals, but it was a local, but it was basically a nationals level tournament as far as attendance and the names of people who would show up. And it was always kind of treated as a kind of a precursor for nationals, what you expect to see in Type 2. We would do multiplayer on Friday night, and then two-player on all of Saturday. There would be Ironman Type 1 in between, just for players who don't play Type 2 or just wanted to play some Type 1 in between rounds and stuff. And it was always a lot of fun. And I really want to get that going again next year. So hopefully through this podcast, we can convince all y'all to play some Type 2, and maybe if we get a Type 2 only going in the kind of early or late winter, early spring in Minnesota, you guys can come out for that.
What's early spring for Minnesota?
I don't even know. I guess it's
August.
It's really midwinter. It was usually February or March is kind of when we would have them. But yeah, so 2007, I won Type 2 multiplayer with a choose the blocker offense with, I'm pretty sure you could still have 5 copies of cards at that time. So it was 5 provisions, 5 lamenting for Jephthah's daughters. And yeah, I know it's a set aside card that takes 4 turns, and it actually worked in Type 2 multi. But yeah, that was, I remember that being kind of a really big moment, and when I really started to like Type 2. And as most of Type 2 multiplayer kind of has a place in my heart, probably because of that. Rest in peace.
Had a place in your heart.
You know what?
Sorry.
Yeah. Anyways, but when I guess in 2-player, and I mean, really I guess my first kind of nationals appearances, or like placings, I guess, in either. Like it wasn't until like 2014, so I guess 7 years after the Type 2 only, that I had my first RNRS and nationals titles. So I'd taken first place in Type 2 two-player at Minnesota State and at North Central Regionals, and then first place in Type 2 multiplayer at State, and second place in multiplayer at Regionals. I ended up in fourth in Type 2 two-player at Nationals, and then second in Type 2 two-player RNRS, and then second place in Type 2 multiplayer and at Nats and in RNRS that year. So a number of kind of lots of, I guess, second place that year. But specifically about it, I remember the deck I was using was something that I kind of came up with and I thought was like really cool and unique. It was like a Disciples, a New Testament Prophets, and Magicians deck. So I was running 2 copies of Nazareth because searching was all the rage. Yeah, still is, but Nazareth was really good if you kind of built around it. And so I used 2 copies of Nunc Dimittis, and then 4 copies of Divination, all to kind of do some like card advantage and card, or I guess like value, while not searching, I guess, and so not letting my opponent search either. And then the Disciples part of the offense was, obviously just pretty strong, as Disciples were at that point. You had drawing off of Matthew and 4-Draft McCoin, and then Thaddeus shenanigans, and then the New Testament Prophets actually, like with Simeon, I could ban to Peter or John, and have both colors in there with a cannot be negated band. And so that was one of my like earliest Type 2 two-player decks that I remember having a lot of fun with and having a good amount of success with. And I actually got this comment from Jordan, my older brother, who was a big Type 2 player. At that point, he was actually the one who won with his Panic Demon deck that year. He said in a comment on my deck list, I'll have to admit it has been a mixture of fun and agonizing to seeing Jaden's development as a Type 2 player. This deck consistently beat both Justin and I throughout the year, and would have beaten me at Nats had it not been for a very well-timed mayhem. This deck was a brilliant mix of speed and power, and if I would have had to give the odds to the players playing Type 2 in the tournament, I would have probably have bet on Jaden. Congrats to my little bro, and I'm confident that his time to hold the Type 2 two-player trophy is coming. So that's, just kind of showing some of my development, I guess, and now, 7 years later.
It's turned into Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah. But there were definitely some close calls in between. One of them being 2016 at Nationals when I had beat Ron Sias in the first round, then Cliff Kreisel, who took third place that year, and then I timeout beat this other random guy who took second place that year, Tyler Stevens. Some of you might have heard of him. So I was feeling pretty good about how things were going in that tournament until I got to round 4 and I was playing Justin, and things were kind of started a little bit slow for me, but I kind of started to recover and stabilize, and I might have been able to pull it off, but I played Mayhem into his RBD and just couldn't recover after that. So that was kind of a tough moment for me, and it kind of tilted me for like the rest of the tournament. So I ended up losing that game. I lost to Jordan in the next round, and then Joe Schaefer in round 6, and kind of just went downhill from there. I guess that, we only played 6 rounds, so that was the end of it. But Justin did mention that he thought I would have won that game had I not made that mistake. Maybe he was just saying it to make me feel better, but at least he had to go on to win that year with his Dark Horse deck, which was pretty sweet. Let's see, 2017 and 2019, I won Type 2 player at the Type 2 only. So those were, kind of 2 other milestones. A lot of times the Type 2 only was kind of a predictor of who would win or at least do well at nationals those years. In 2019, I did get second place with Lightning Priest, lost to Josiah Beers. in a very strange game. I got the combo off early on, but made a couple mistakes also that I would have gotten it off sooner. It would have been a little bit more effective. Ended up being 2-2 going into Josiah's last turn with both of us having played Son of God, and then he drew his second coming on his draw 3. So that was what made the difference that year. Let's see. 2018, that's also kind of an important one. I almost got first place, but I made costly mistake number 2, I guess. So I ended up in 6th place. Some other the same random guy from before took first place that year. But I took 6th place with 8 points, and Tyler took first place with 11 points. So that's how close the top 6 players were that year. And it was the last round where I was playing Nathan Leverson. He's a Rochester, Minnesota guy. He played Music Leader in pretty much every deck, since Music Leader came out. And it was like my last turn, and I made, maybe it was my second to last turn, I guess, and I made this like monumental mistake. I think I used like Storehouse or something to grab an enhancement, and I triggered his Music Leader when I didn't need the enhancement, and I knew that I couldn't trigger Music Leader for whatever reason, because I think probably let him get whatever he needed to rescue on his turn, maybe like a 24 Elders or something. And if I hadn't done that, then I would have had him like locked out, and then would have won on my next turn. But he ended up winning, and if I had won that game, then I would have been at 11 points, and I did timeout win against Tyler again that year. So no, I would have won the head-to-head tiebreaker there. Let's see, in 2020, I got another second place in Type 2 player, also with Lightning Priest. Tyler finally figured out how to beat me, so he took first again that year.
Time.
Yeah, right.
And you helped me beat you.
I don't even remember what. You got to tell me what happened there again. I forgot.
That was the Babylonian soothsayers.
Oh, soothsayers. That's right. Yep.
So, and you had 2 of them out, and you said Son of God's Second Coming, and I was at 5 and hadn't played Son of God's Second Coming, or I was at 4. I rescued, but I still couldn't get. Like I was able to pop 1, like negate 1 and get rid of it, because you had to negate their ability and get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't played the big 2, and he had got rid of my 3 woes earlier. Like he had discarded my 3 woes at the very beginning of the game. So I hadn't played the big 2, but I could only get to 6. And I had Soldier's Prayer and Solomon's Dream, and I had all these ways to just go through. And I was looking through deck and then looking through discard as well, because I was able to do both and try to get to a Solomon's Dream to get to a dominant, because I didn't draw into the big 2. And so, I mean, we were, I will say, we were at a time, but we were in the very like that was it. It was game over. This is it. Done.
Right,
the turn's over. The phase is over. Battle phase is over. And I'm sitting there looking, and we're just kind of like talking as we're looking. And I'm like, I know there's something here. I don't know about a legality, because you have so many seconds per card, 30 seconds per card, but you have loops of Soldier's Prayer, and then you can go back through Solomon's Dream, and at each territory class you reset the counter per phase, and we're talking, and regardless, it would have been a 6-5 or 6-4, 6-5 timeout win for me, and it didn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
But Jaden was just like, well, I'm glad I got rid of your 3 woes earlier. And I was like, oh yeah, thanks. Solomon's Dream to 3 woes to negate that to Soldier's Prayer to Solomon's Dream to Second Coming for 7. And he was just like, yeah, are we still out of time? And I was like, I
don't know. Let's see. Was it because you... Maybe I just named Son of God because I had discarded your 3 woes of something, wasn't it?
Yeah, you had discarded my
Second Coming to get 3 woes back.
Yeah, and then I was able to correct, and then I was able to negate, go back, and get and then go from my deck to get Son of God.
Yep.
because I wasn't able to play Son of God. I could play one or the other, and I didn't play it because I wasn't. Regardless, I can get to the other, but I had to get to 7.
Mm-hmm.
And he reminded me so nicely that he had discarded it at the beginning of the game. I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll just go get that then.
I might have been under the impression that the round was over, or like we were calling it, but
I was under the
I
impression
don't
the round was over.
But yeah, then last year, I guess I figured out how to beat Tyler in time, finish the game, and I did all right. Um, yeah, ended up first place in Type 2 player, and first place in Type 2 multiplayer for the last time ever. Also for the 4th time in the last 4 years. I suppose that's maybe worth mentioning, but that can, I guess now there's no chance that anyone ever breaks that record, so it's I can hold on to that.
So that's quite the resume there. So it looks like you this past Nats, you finally got the monkey off your back.
Yep.
So how did that feel for you?
Um, it felt pretty good, I guess. It was like kind of like okay, it's about time I'd finally, managed to do it. I guess, doing it with Lightning Priest wasn't going to work because, the last two years I got second with it, and then Lightning Priest also took second this year, this past year. So clearly that wasn't the deck, and I was like really like towards the beginning of the year, I guess, when neither Eyes to See nor Love at First Sight had been discovered, or at least publicized yet, I guess. I was kind of going back and forth between like, oh, do I want to play either of those decks, and do I want to play either of them in Type 1 instead of Type 2? Because if there was a chance to get a Type 1 title, it would be with maybe one of these decks kind of coming out of nowhere. And that was back when I thought that I was the only one who knew about them. And then I think when they were publicized and there was kind of this unspoken, maybe partially spoken agreement not to play Love at First Sight in Type 2, at least between like Tyler and I and maybe some of the other guys. But it was like, okay, I can go back to what I really wanted to play, which was post-exilic. And I think it felt a lot better than it would have if I won with some stupid combo deck.
So I guess we'll just roll over to you, Tyler, and I guess somewhere in Jaden's rant or going over his his history, there was like
There was a little salt in that, wasn't there?
this random person over and over, and now we'll get to hear from the said random person.
Yeah, so I'm random guy that Jaden had to get through for the title, and from his story, I pretty much came right into Type 2. I started playing. I've been on your podcast for, so I won't get into that. Being in Georgia, the Southeast was just dominated by Type 2 players. Great Type 2 players too, not just in Georgia, but Tennessee's East Central. But we still had South Carolina and North Carolina that had phenomenal players back then. And so when I started playing, it was about really competitive. I think it was 03. And then I think I caught the tail end of that season. But regardless, I only played Type 1 for really 2 years competitively. I was already playing Type 2 by 05. By 04, I would have had my first state title in Type 2. And we were going to, I don't know if Kirk Dennison was at that state, but we had Kirk Dennison, Cliff Kreisel, we had the Aries brothers, Chris McCravey, and Eric Largent. We had big names. And that kind of goes back to when you had John Early on last week. Well, by the time this comes out, you had John Early on last week and talking about iron sharpening iron. It was when you went to nationals and we called us the Southern boys, and all us Georgia boys showed up. We were looking to take home as many Type 2 titles as we could. We just had this one clan of Allsteads that we had to go through. So I went to my first nationals in 2006. I played Justin. I beat Justin then. and I didn't know who he was. I'm gonna be honest, I had no clue. Sorry, Justin. I beat him and kind of moved on, and he was mad. I whooped him. I walked through like 5 straight with a strong angel. He was so mad, and I was like, oh, okay. And I think Eric Largent was like, do you know who you just beat? I was like, I don't know. He wasn't happy. He had an excuse. So, just kidding, Justin. And he was like, yeah, you just beat one of the best Type 2 players. I was like, oh, that's awesome. So I had a misplay against Eric that year. I still remember. He wasn't really doing much against me. He couldn't do much. He was playing the defensive at that point. I took over the game. The momentum kind of shifts in Type 2 so often. And he wasn't really doing much, and I didn't see him do anything. He flipped an artifact and your turn, because he just skipped all the rest of the phases. If you don't need to do anything in those phases. Back then you really couldn't. So I went to attack with my Michael, gathered 2 Strong Angel Warriors, and I had negates and battle winners that were CBN. It was pretty nasty, and he said, "Nope, you can't. You have I activated Household Idols." I was like, "What?" I was like, "When?" It's like, "I just attacked last turn." He was like, "I didn't have that active last turn." So he got the one block that he needed. Ended up losing by either 1 or 2, because he got the big 2, but he got the one block, and that was it. I think I lost 7-6, and I played the guy who won, who went prior to Jaden. The only guy to ever go undefeated at Type 2, I believe, at Nationals, was Ross Lang. And I played him, and he said that was the closest game he had at Nationals. And he was like, "What's your name?" Like, I was like, "Oh, I'm Eric Largent's protege," and because I was a little kid back then. But yeah, that was my first Nationals. I got 3rd place in Type 2 2-player, 2nd place in Type 2 multi. Heck, I even had a top 10 finish in booster that I'm always proud of. But yeah, I've been playing Type 2 pretty much since I started playing. You're kind of forced into Type 2 back in the day in Georgia. I've ranked at 10 Nationals, 06 through 21. I used to play a lot of multiplayer from 2013, 15, 16, and 17. I either got 1st or 2nd in Type 2 multi. Justin and I just went back and forth. I got a couple titles, I think I have 2 thirds, 2 seconds, and 2 firsts, and then a lot of multiplayers here and there. So well versed in Type 2. I love playing it. It's so fun. We'll get more into that too. But yeah, I've made a lot of crazy decks. My not my claim to fame, I don't know, but I know a lot of people say this about me, is that I throw my decks out there. Like, I don't really hold much back. I like to give to the community. Sometimes I put decks out there that I shouldn't, but maybe I should hold them, or maybe I should actually play them at Nationals prior to. So I've put out a couple decks. I've given National winners the actual deck list, and then I was like, I'm not going to play these. Here you go. And they got 1st place. That's happened twice. They piloted them well, and they knew exactly what they were doing, but verbatim list. So there is that, and then I think a New Beginning reset, Kirk originally played. I don't remember playing him or seeing it, but he said he played me and beat me, so I definitely give him credit. So I'm sure I pulled that from him, but I created the New Beginning reset, I thought, and I did that in the terminal before we went to California. Eric Largent and I were getting ready and played New Beginning reset. I lost to Gabe, who was using Speed Camp, Cliff's deck, and Gabe was like, "This is awesome." So he played Speed Camp, and that was up there with Lafis, I think. And from a Type 2 perspective, I think it was better than the Dominator, or the Devastator, if you guys have heard of that deck. But that's a old school. But regardless, been around the game for a long time, seen a lot of decks, made a lot of decks. I like to do the best I can to kind of create and set the meta in Type 2 and kind of push out as many ideas as I can. And we were joking around prior to the podcast of there, what's the meta in Type 2? There is no meta. So that's another thing that I like the most, is kind of put out there what's good. And a lot of times you'll see what's good in Type 2 is sometimes not feasible in Type 1. So that's another reason why I love Type 2. But yeah, that's all I got for now on that. We can move forward.
I will say Brian Hake went undefeated in Type 2 player at 2002 Nationals.
Oh yeah, yeah, I can see that. He was good.
Well, let me ask you guys, what do you think the overall learning curve is for Type Two? Like, if you said you didn't play it very much, Tyler, you went mostly into Type Two based on your play group and who was in your area. Well, what do you think the overall, knowing everything you know now, the the curve for coming into the game, learning how to play Type One versus learning how to play Type Two?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I guess I would say the curve isn't very steep early on. Like, I mean, there's only a few more rules that you need to keep track of. A lot of it is in the deck building. So like making sure that your deck is legal can be a little bit trickier. But if you just pull a deck list, that's already made and try that out first, I think that would give you kind of a good idea for how it's played differently, and I mean that's going to be how you're going to build your own decks and figure out what's important there. But I think just kind of getting a hang of the new rules is really the only like thing that you really have to learn, and then I mean you'll kind of learn from there, like how those rules I guess impact the game. But other than that, I mean uh, there's like deck building is maybe the hardest thing to learn, like how your deck's gonna look different. But the actual gameplay, I would say, is pretty much just Type One, but bigger decks, and um, it's gonna just look a little bit different because your decks are a little bit bigger and a little bit more copies of certain cards.
Uh, I would say new players think there's this massive steep curve in Type Two because they'll sit down and they'll see some of these top players playing Type 2, and there's just the whole board's covered, and it's overwhelming. But Jaden already talked about that, where that's not the learning curve. That you're looking at the top players of the game playing a competitive game. You can go to any Type 1 game, there's going to be resources all over the board. In Type 2, you can just have a little bit more of them. Technically, you pretty much have twice, but up to four of the same card, but you can have twice the resources because it's a 100 card deck, essentially. So you're going to have all these different resources down, and people look at it and they see, and we'll get into this later, but the money aspect, and it's overwhelming. It's just, how can I keep up with all this? And they're so scared. And it's like, you can't look at it like that. Don't look at it from people that have that have beaten the best and played with the best and played for years in Type 2. If you really bring it down and simplify it, it's not this massive learning curve. There's a couple abilities, which, let's be real, rescuer's choice. We kind of say that at the end anyway. So just throw a counter on your hero if he rescues a lost soul, and throw a counter on your blocker if he or she blocks. There's not too much. You can get into the deck intricacies later, but as for actually playing, you can sit down in No Redemption and sit down and play Type 2. It's not a completely different game.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you mentioned that a lot of players kind of get dissuaded to give it a try because of the overwhelming aspect of it, looking at two high end players playing it, all the resources on the board. Then you think about all the fact that you have more staples, you have more money cards. So I think there's like that barrier, and that's kind of why I wanted to do this episode. Is it's like there's this barrier for people to even try it. Um, how would you guys, in your own words, describe what Type Two like as an experience? What is that like, and why should someone like me want to give that a try?
So when we talked, we joked about the meta, that there is no meta. Um, that alone is enticing. That when I sit down and look at who I played at nationals and in other tournaments and prior to, for years, there's barely been two of the same versions of the deck, or two similar archetypes, really. There's nothing that's the same. You're always going to get something different from an offense and defensive standpoint. I'll say the defenses are a little slightly more center focused, but the fact that you have defenses alone creates more gameplay, more battles, you have to. It's more of a chess game, in my opinion. You have to think, because you don't just, if you give up one or two at the beginning in type one, you're automatically on tilt, because that's it. They play the big two. They set up another one of their guaranteed rescues. That's pretty much game. It's very hard to come back from that, and that's why everyone says whoever goes first wins in type one. That's not the case in type two. I talked about this before, of momentum shifts, where you can physically, like, you can feel it, to where you're having that player on tilt, that you're just overwhelming them, and next thing you know, Jaden drops a mayhem, and I shuffle my whole hand in, and I'm like, oh well, that sucks. And like Jaden said, he drops a mayhem against his brother with Rain Becomes Dust active. Like, not that mayhem's the momentum card. You can see when resources start to diminish, and when people use their resources really heavily. Like if I play Justin, he is more, I want to bury Justin early, and I want to pressure him big time, because the longer Justin's in the game, he's more of the slow, methodical player that gathers his resources. I'm more of the aggro. I'm going to come at you real quick, put pressure on you, limit your resources at the beginning. There's completely different types of ways to play the game in type 2, and you have more battles and more chances to win, and not just, oh, I'm down 2-0 at the beginning. In turn 2, I'm down, and that's it. It's pretty much game over. In type 2, it's like, no, this is fine. Just keep playing and move forward, because they might have just used dominance early, like I did against Jaden before, or I might have used my main attacks early on, and now they have all this defense that they can set up later. So it's a completely different game. It's a whole other beast, to where you really get to see the entirety of the cards in Redemption, that I don't feel like you get to see in type 1. The last point I have is there's a lot of staples, and in Redemption you have those really like 8 to 12 cards that you can say that you just kind of sleeve up, don't think about it, and move on. A lot of dominance and Lost Souls. So you sleeve them up, you put them in. Well, that right there, let's just call it 10 cards. That right there is 20% of your deck. So, but in type 2, 10% of your deck. So you can throw in all these staples, but you still have an entire deck that you have to build. In type 1, you're trying to get to those dominants, and in type 2, yes, of course, you're still on your dominance, but you're building so much more around that, and you're more focused on your theme and strategy of your deck on both offense and defense, and what you're trying to accomplish in the game state, compared to just kind of racing, getting a couple and dropping some dominance. So that's my pitch to everyone, especially you, John, on what's so good about type 2.
Yeah. And I'd say that, like, even right now, we're kind of seeing type 1 become a little bit more defensive. Games are kind of taking a little bit longer, kind of like with the reserve rule and stuff. And like, I think that that's kind of what you should kind of expect going into a game of type 2, is like, the decks are balanced, good and evil. So you're going to have more interactions. And I think that because of the way you build decks, like, you can have multiple copies of certain cards, that does make a much wider variety of decks viable, I guess, or like, kind of at the same level. Throne was still, pretty good. Tyler won with that in 2020. And it's going to be still going to be a good deck, similar to how it was good in type 1. But there are going to be other decks that have kind of similar aggressive strategies, and then also decks that can handle it because they have a substantial amount of defense. So yeah, I think you definitely see a lot more variety and a little more kind of interaction. And if you have a theme that you really like, but it's not all that great in type 1, I'm sure that there's a version of it that could be viable in type 2, if you just kind of work it with the same, or with the right number of copies of certain cards and whatnot. And then the last thing, you mentioned how, like, you have all these staples, and one of the common barriers is like the cost prohibitive part of that. Which I can see the argument for some of them, like I mean, Exiles and Remnant, for example. Like those are cards that are kind of expensive, and Type Two you can have two of the same Lost Souls, so you can you just need to get another copy of each of those. But a lot of the other staples, I would say, like I pretty much only use one of in each of my Type 2 decks. I mean, Dominance, obviously, you can only have one of each of those still. And cards like Endless Treasures and Book of the Law and Emmaus Road, like they're all cards that, I mean, I guess you can have up to 3 copies of artifacts, but usually I don't. It's certainly okay to get away with one or two of certain powerful cards. So I mean, I think like the only ultra rare that I can think of that's come out in the last, I mean, like in rotation, even I guess, like that I can think of that you can have 4 of is Eternal Inheritance. But other than that, it's like 1 or 2 of most of them. Book of the Covenant, I suppose you can have 3, but
you don't want to use 3 of those.
Yeah, no.
All right, so I guess that's a good transition to get into. You guys already hinted at it, that part of the most overwhelming part probably is when you get ready to build a deck. So you sit down. I think everybody pretty much knows how to build a Type 1 deck. If you don't, then you can kind of refer to like even the rule book that comes with the INJ starter decks. They can tell you the basic deck building rules. As far as Type 2, it's like you're throwing out that you can have 4 of a card. You used to be able to have 5. You can have 3 of artifacts. You can have 2 lost souls. It's like numbers everywhere. And it's like, break that down and explain to me how, like, someone that's a complete noob at it, that's me. I have no idea. I've sat down and watched Chris and Jay play every now and then at a tournament in Alabama. And I've seen like the board full of resources, and I've seen the little pebbles that he puts down for his counters, and I don't know what half that stuff means. And then when you get into like you talk about momentum shifts, how's this for momentum shifts? How do you rip 3 plots and lose a game in Type 2? And Type 1, that's easily a win. Like if you rip a plot, you're usually winning. And that's not to throw shade at Jay, but like I definitely get what you're saying about like the momentum and how that. But again, like you're talking about the fact that like there's just so much you can do within deck building. How do you not get overwhelmed with that?
I do think that 3 plots and losing is not the record in Type 2. Just want to
not normal.
It's not normal, but I'm pretty sure. I think it was Chris Bainey who, back when you could have like 8 of a card, or was it just like?
It was 1 per 20 with up to 200. There was no max on a deck either, so you could play 1 per 20, and then So he had it like a 160 card deck with 7 of them or whatever, 8.
I want to say he played like 6. Let's see. I guess I would say, I mean, so as far as like the numbers go, I mean, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but it is laid out, I think, relatively clearly as far as like, how many of each type you can have in. I'm pretty sure it's in the REG or one of those rules documents, where it's like you can have like 2 sites with special abilities, 3 of a fortress, and then which if you have a cards that have like 2 icons on them like a city, then it's whichever one is the most limiting, so you can only have 2 of a city.
Dual brigade you could have 2 of, tri brigade and more you could have 1 of. I mean, all that stuff, like, you'll get there. A lot of it just posted on the board and Jade and I will comment, but yeah, it's in the RAG. Discord's out there. Those are the intricacies of deck building.
Or as you stated earlier, we can just wait for you to post the deck that's going to win and see if you can pilot it.
Yeah, just copy paste, play it.
Pretty much, yeah. You just wait for Craig Fountain to show up at a Nationals, and then he'll just hand out 5 decks to random people. And
let's kind of, without getting into like the overall specifics, because those are in the reg. They're one of the first items that comes up. Is you've got the deck building rules and you've got it listed out. with the band cards, and then type 1, then type 2. So we can go there if like we're super interested in trying out the format, and it lays it out. It is still from a completely new player, like for this category, that perspective. It is overwhelming still, but um let's not do the straight specifics. Let's just kind of do like roundabouts. So in type 1 decks, generally 12 heroes is kind of like the ceiling of what you want, and then you've got a certain amount of enhancements. Maybe on your evil characters you're looking at maybe 8, 9 if you're using an extra one in the reserve, and then 4 or 5 evil enhancements. How do those splits between cards? Is it basically just double for type 2 to where now I can have 24 heroes, or is it you want to have 18, 20 heroes and more ways to get to them? How do you split that up?
I think I could probably say what Jaden's ratios and builds are, and he can probably say what mine are. But
Probably.
I am a heavy character player in Type 2. I want probably, unless I have like 3 characters in the reserve, then I want a minimum 16 heroes, but more than likely I usually try to play about 17 to 19 heroes in the main deck with another, anywhere from 1 to 3 depending on what I'm trying to accomplish in the reserve. Remember, the reserve's 15 cards. The reserve also has to be equal. So yeah, I'm playing heavy characters because as long as I have a character, I could theoretically at least attack and block and at least play my enhancements off them when I get the stars and the territory class and whatnot. Stars don't matter, but I'm saying from like a plumb line kind of thing. So just to be able to have, that's where I talk about the resources. But I play more character heavy and a little bit less enhancements. I play a lot of less neutral cards. So I max out the characters and enhancements because I try to tend to focus on the battle. And I usually play negates, banding, add to battle, heavy characters, heavy enhancements. So my builds are a little different. But no, you don't just double up on 12. Type 1 actually started playing more of a ratio of Type 2 to where they were doing more character focused. And so they actually started adding more heroes. If you look at the old builds of Type 1, they didn't have as many heroes. They were a little bit more balance focused and less heroes. Now it's okay. Well, can have all these heroes that do all these things, and I can band them all together, and I can play different territory class enhancements off of all these cards. So
I definitely get that because when I started with Flood Survivors, you got the 8 and you have to maintain unity, and 8 just feels like it's not quite enough. Or they got for a while it got to where it just felt like it wasn't enough.
well, you were slipping because everyone else had 10 to 12, and they were able to generate more stuff. So I play a little heavier, but that's my ratios. Jaden, what about you?
Yeah. So I guess I'm kind of the same, but a little bit less on characters, and I think a little bit more like utility and neutral kind of stuff. Because I usually think like, I mean, there's not a whole lot of different characters that I want to be pushing into battle as much. I mean, there's a lot of different characters, but every deck, even or same kind of thing in Type 1, you're gonna have kind of like your main, like go-to rescues and that kind of stuff. So I tend to play a lot more cards that kind of support, or I mean, right now it's really easy to play cards that like search and do things like territory class stuff to kind of get you set up. So I would say that like I guess the just looking at the post-exilic Greek deck that I played on the channel, which has pretty similar numbers to um, what I played at Nationals on offense. I was playing 14 heroes and 14 good enhancements. Um, and I think that, I mean, maybe to put that into perspective for people, it might be good to start with kind of the split between like good, evil, and neutral. Like if you're just starting out, 40, 40, 25 is kind of the like go to. You've got a 105 card deck. Then if there was going to be like a starter Type 2 deck, I think it would probably be like 38, 38, 24 or something like that. Because it'd be 100 cards then. And so if you've got 38 good cards. A good chunk of those are going to be dominance. So maybe you've got, like 32 other cards to work with. Then, I mean, if you're splitting up heroes and enhancements, then you're like evenly, you're still looking at, like 14 to 16 of each. And then, maybe a few fortresses or covenants in there. So that's kind of, I think I differ just a little bit, is kind of having a few more of those utility cards in there, but really, I think just having ways to like search for certain cards, like get certain heroes and certain, offensive strategies, I guess, out, is, important in type 2 when you have such a big deck and you're, kind of wanting to get to the important cards that you're going to use the most.
Let me ask you, you kind of hinted at it, Tyler, that you have 15 card reserve, but then you have to balance out good and evil. So does that force you to have at least one neutral card in there? That way you get 7 and one neutral. Is that kind of like a forced rule?
Yeah, so you have to have one neutral regardless because it's an odd number, and you have to have an even number of both good and evil in your reserve as well. So then it comes down to, what do I want in my reserve? Do I go 6-6-3 or do I go 7-7-1? That's kind of the two main builds that you see, because anything, I mean, you can go 5-5-5 and you have 5 neutrals. Then you can definitely do that with all the neutrals coming out. I tend to stick to a 6-6 or a 7-7 once again because I go more into a character enhancement heavy. My 2020 build had a 6-6-3, and that's because I had the Ashira, Treacherous Lands, Majestic Heaven. So I'm trying to at least have some sort of, can I grab a neutral that I can get pretty much immediate value from, or that I specifically need for a purpose, like some sort of point. And usually it's just like, if I have a hopper in reserve, I'm going to want, Majestic Heavens, I'm going to want a hopper in reserve. And if I have one hopper, I can just go back to back with 2 hoppers and Majestic Heavens. So it kind of depends on how you want to split up the reserve. But yeah, it's definitely one neutral.
Okay. Another common thing that comes up with like deck building in Type 1 is a lot of the focus. It's kind of like you mentioned earlier. There's like those 10, 12 cards that you keep sleeved up. It's mostly dominance, lost souls, and they kind of slide into everything. What are some of the most dominant usage of dominance and lost souls in Type 2? What would be common to see if you were like overlooking a standard game?
What you think, Jaden?
I guess I'm trying to think of like what would necessarily be different than in type 1. I guess, I mean, you have more dominance, so I think you would certainly see a few more of kind of the niche ones, or just kind of like, the ones like doubt or, vain philosophy that don't make it into every or even most type 1 decks these days. You'll see those in type 2.
Kind of to expand and make it more clear what I was kind of asking at.
Yeah.
Maybe I didn't make the question clear. Was like, so you have lost souls that don't see a lot of play because you're forcing those few in. Do people kind of work with a strategy of like trying to limit rescues with their souls in Type 2 to use some of those like restrictive souls? Do they use more of the counter souls, setup souls? Like what's the usage there? And then you have a lot of like battle enhancing dominance that don't necessarily get a lot of play in Type 1. Like you mentioned, you got doubt before now, and coming back. I think it's becoming more popular now that there's a really good looking card of it. But Grapes of Wrath, things of that nature. Like since you have more, how does that look in compared to Type 1?
Jaden and I pretty much use the same souls. The soul packages are at a top level kind of the same. It's the same thought process in Type 1 that we're trying to get as many resources as we can right off the rip, from that initial draw 8. Jaden went this year with Covets, and we talked about it, and he was like, yeah, I wasn't sure if that was the right move or not. And I took out the Covets, but we're both going to play. He played 1 Distressed. Sometimes I play 1 Distressed as well because it's an ongoing ability. I like Lost Souls that give me an ongoing ability. So I can justify an ongoing ability to just have 1 ofs. And so I'll do like a 1 Wicked with a 1 Distress, but I like having 2 Distress just in case you get them out early and stuff. But when it comes,
You were running dull this year, weren't you? Or maybe that was last year. I'm thinking of.
no, I think it was this year, but it was just one. It was just a one of. Yeah, I think that was all it was. But all I did was just run the one. But mostly we're gonna run the two hunters, the two remnants, the two exiles, the two darkness. Usually two prosperities, two distress. You can go one distress, like I said, or one prosperity. Interesting enough, Jaden went two prosperities, one distress this year, and I went two distress, one prosperity last year. So you got two first place decks there. It's really all about resources, and you have that because it's still seven lost souls essentially. You just double them up. Now, do you want to take out a 2x of one to put in an ongoing ability or a niche lost soul? And him and I do that, but it's mostly the same lost souls.
Oh no, you went one crowds this year.
Oh yeah, that's what it was. I knew you were going to be playing impartial. Yeah. So, which came out early, but I went two crowds and they both came out early, I thought. But
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you must have not changed your list on the boards.
yeah, I went two crowds, I believe. But I think the major difference in quote unquote staples, not the dominance per se in the souls, because you do get the extra dominance. So then you can kind of add everything essentially. The big difference is the neutral cards. You get to add destruction, stuff like that. But I'm saying the fortresses are the biggest difference I see. Like a staple for me is Arc of Salvation. So where that's amazing in type 1, it might not be like amazing as a staple. So I think the fortresses are a big difference in staples in type 1 and type 2.
And if you're keeping up at home, that's the Noah's Ark, Ark of Salvation, that is actually good for everything except for flood survivors. But don't ask me about it.
For a while, for me, that was a staple in type 1, but definitely in type 2.
Mm.
It's like it's one of those borderline cards where it's like you have the extra space, it's definitely going in. Like if you had the extra space in type 1, like that's, going to be the 51st card or whatever, or maybe the 11th card in the reserve.
And early will tell you you're crazy if you don't play Storehouse in type 1, but that's another card that I don't see a lot of play in type 1 is Storehouse and Wall of Protection.
Mm-hmm.
And those I'm just pretty much, until GOC, that's pretty much auto ads for me.
Yep.
I think Storehouse is still pretty common in the few games that I've played. I think it started to take a hit with some of the punishment in LOC, and then some of the cards that we've seen and hinted at that are coming with GOC. I think Storehouse is kind of, it's on the decline.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets a little bit better with the reserve rule because, games are slowing down just a little bit, and Storehouse is one of those, like, payoff cards over time, getting the value with taking cards from your reserve, not just the protection.
I know that the access is something, but you have the fact that there's so much, regardless of protectabilities, that it's really not there for that. And then you have, well, I guess it does stop you from like Voice of Heaven, right? Because that just makes the enhancements, regardless of protect. It doesn't make its own ability, regardless of protect.
Well, can you use that in type 1 or is that a type 2 card?
I don't know. Why don't you guys tell me?
Yeah, I cannot wait from because I get to say I got to take my hobby in a different angle this year. And, it's been so long, we got to spice up things that I get to now take a different perspective, that now that GOC's essentially done, that this year I'm going to be looking at the interactions, and I can't wait to see, because I haven't seen many rotation. All I see is people saying games take longer, and that's because I think people are like, oh, well, I don't know what I'm making yet, and I'm not going to derail this podcast to a rotation podcast, but I don't think people fully, and they shouldn't because rotation's brand new, understand the meta of rotation yet, nor do they get with GOC, because GOC phase 1 is just looming around the corner,
I think I get what you're saying, to where like people aren't as motivated right now to go out and spend investment of
Yep.
money, time, resources into developing decks, just to feel like, oh, as soon as GOC Phase 1 comes out, boom, I've got to start from scratch.
So here's the thing. We're only getting Phase 1. We're only getting a certain amount of themes. So it's like I said at the beginning, we're going to have this conglomerate of Old Testament and New Testament at Nationals. If you don't fully understand rotation, if you're not playing rotation right now, you're not expecting to win Nationals. I'm just being honest. And that goes for both Type 1 and Type 2. You need to understand what rotation is. So when Phase 1 comes out, you're not just opening up everything and all of a sudden you have to figure out rotation, which is a way bigger beast than Phase 1. And then you have to factor in, oh, we have New Testament offenses and defenses now. So I think from both staples of Type 1, bringing this back to the point of staples of Type 1 and Type 2, we're going to change that up moving forward. And I still think people are just kind of waiting on, well, what does rotation look like? And I think it will revert back to, this game always favors offense, and it's going to favor offense because that's how the game should be from its actual standpoint. It's just a matter of people haven't necessarily found out those offenses yet and they're building balance. So, which, hey, if you're building balance, guess what? Just play Type 2.
All right. So, way to bring it back full circle there. I guess kind of move away from deck building, I guess, and go into like unpacking the gameplay of Type 2. So, as a Type 1 player, I know what to expect when a game starts, whether I'm going first or going second. I know what a turn looks like. And I kind of know what I can do and what I can affect when I'm the non-active player based on potential dominance in my hand, or knowing what they're doing to kind of figure out what their overall strategy is. And then definitely if it's my turn, I know what all I can do in a turn. What does a standard Type 2 turn look like? Because it seems like there's a lot of like setup and prep phase.
Jaden's the king of what a Type 2 turn looks like, and I've been ran. So tell him what you do.
So you have your preparation phase, and then like 20 minutes later you go to your battle phase.
So 20 minutes.
And then 20 minutes later, John Early comes by and says, "Who went first?"
I mean, the thing is, it's not even that you don't even have that many actions. You're just spending like 10 minutes shuffling, really. With all the search abilities and stuff that you have in Type 2. I mean, just because you have like more room to put search cards in, and then you have there's more cards that you have to search through to get to the ones you actually want. This year at Nationals, the deck I was playing, I'm looking at it right now, and there were two good enhancements that were not territory class, and they were both impartial judgment. And so, I mean, pretty much what would happen is like the first, maybe 2 or 3 rounds of the game, my preparation phases are going to be taking a lot longer because I'm, getting things set up and kind of getting ready for kind of the, big, impartial judgment play. And I guess that's kind of maybe an edge case with my deck because it's sort of a combo deck in that way. But I think that's a little bit where Eric can describe most Type 2 games, where there's going to be a lot of kind of setup early on, but once you kind of get in the rhythm, like turns kind of start to go a little bit faster, and then Tyler mentioned before that there can be like a big shift during the game, and things might take a little bit longer at that point. But I think during the turn, it kind of varies a little bit throughout the game, where you're going to have a little bit more setting up early on, and then later in the game you're going to be more like, okay, I've got my rescue that's been working the last 2 turns, and this is kind of what I'm know I want to do. And then maybe this time they'll have something to block it, and you gotta then kind of readjust. But yeah, definitely a lot of emphasis on the prep phase and kind of getting some set up before you actually make your attack. And then the battles are going to be a little bit longer because there's going to be offense and defense. But if you're doing enough setup, then I guess like in my deck, the battles usually didn't last too long. So it kind of depends on how much setup you're doing and how that affects the battle. But if with the balance of offense and defense, there's going to be a little more interaction there.
Type 1 games already run long at times, and there's a fairly high rate of timeouts in tournaments. So how the heck do you guys finish a Type 2 game in time?
Well, it's a kind of a balance though, because if I'm taking a lot of time in my preparation phase to set up, it's usually because I'm getting cards that make the battle last not quite as long. So, if I'm using the first sacrifice to look at your hand and underdeck an evil card, that means I know exactly, more or less what my best option is in order to, rescue a lost soul or kind of give myself the best chance in the battle. And so it's not, quite going to take as long. But the other thing is in Type 2, you also get 15 more minutes of play, um, which still,
Jaden gets one prep phase extra.
And the other player gets nothing.
what would you say on like the ratio of timeouts in Type 1 to Type 2, Tyler? Because I feel like it's close to even.
There's not much of a difference because the one thing, and I in no way I'm not any sort of arrogant type. I know Jaden's not.
Let me ask you what you're about to say. Can I guess what you're about to say?
Yeah.
Is that Type 2 players are a little bit more advanced and understand the game a little bit, know what they're doing?
Yes.
Take as long?
You don't just have ROKs in Type 2. It's very hard to find. You have players that know what they're doing, and they also know their deck. You're not just well, you are, but most people don't just throw together a Type 2 deck and walk up to Nationals and play.
Or build it in the terminal?
Or yeah, so just forget about that story I said. So most and not have success. Most players shouldn't do that, and they know their deck very well. Who's the music leader guy in Minnesota? Jaden?
Nathan Leverson.
Nathan, yeah. I mean, prime example, and like you said, he pretty much since music leader came out. But players know their deck. Also, there's always your top heavy players too. But there's so much going on, and I don't know. I don't think there's too much. I won't beat this to a point. I don't think there's too much of a difference in timeout, especially recently. I would say you're more than likely to finish a Type 2 game than you are a Type 1. A lot of games timed out last year in Type 1.
Yeah, and that's before the reserve rule.
Yeah, and I don't think the reserve rule really affects a whole lot in Type 2. I mean, maybe a little bit with the Lost Souls, but I think definitely less than in Type 1.
I honestly don't think it affects all that much either in Type 1. I think psychologically it affects a lot more than it actually does X's and O's. I think people are just so used to how games played before, and they kind of just want that to where when you actually start playing games, and I mentioned this when I did the podcast last week with John, that I think it actually makes me a better player. And I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm like, instead of the game moving faster, I'm sitting there thinking like, okay, would you hurry up so that I can do this because I'm gonna beat you?
Yeah.
I mean, and I didn't used to think that fast. Like it would be happening as fast as I'm thinking, and now it's like my thoughts are moving a little bit faster than what my play is, and it could just be more experience because I went to my first nationals, went through that whole experience. I think I got a ton better last tournament season, and then part of that could just be natural progression towards getting better, but I think a lot of it is just like psychological to where it's like we're having to play differently, so we don't necessarily like the change abruptly. That you expect that it has a bigger effect than it does.
Yeah, and the reserve was being used as a crutch. That's what it was. People were just leaning heavily on the reserve. I'm a prime example. I'm going to rip through my reserve and get everything I want, and then it allows me to go to my deck. And that wasn't the intent of the reserve, and it wasn't fair because I could get a massive swing in turn one because I'm going straight into something in my reserve that allows me to pretty much get a draw 3 and a search. I'm throwing down stuff, setting up my territory, and I'm able to block turn one, and you're not. So it turned into a huge crutch to where, yes, you're more experienced, but you are a better player now because we kicked away your crutch, and if you fell, you had to get back up, and you had to learn how to rely on your play ability and deck building ability. And what do you know? You have to know what's in your deck. And I think we were watering down the redemption community because people knew what was in the reserve, and they didn't care what was in their deck because they can just go to the reserve to get what's in their deck.
as soon as GOC Phase 1 comes out, like, you're talking about people using the reserve as a crutch. I'm not worried about the reserve anymore. I'm really interested. And you asked earlier, was Voice of Heaven going to be played in Type 1? You're darn right it is, because I'm going to try to play it. My two favorite cards that I'm looking forward to now, like in theory, is Transfiguration and that of what we've gotten spoiled so far.
Jaden, did you play test Transfiguration a good bit?
Not that much really. Yeah, I did a lot more of like gold and a little bit of like gold and white, and yeah, I didn't really do much with Transfiguration.
I'm going to be honest, that card pretty much didn't change since version 1.
Yeah.
We kind of were like, oh, yep, that's good. Move on. And we play tested it, and it was like, I mean, at first, I played heavy Clay, Meek, Disciples, and I was doing all sorts of stuff with territory class negating, with setting up, with drawing, with bounce manipulation of the bounce, and then having like automatic rescues. Like, I think Awesome Ride is going to be more of a staple move going forward because there's so much you can do now with Meek. And like you talked about with John early, St. Patrick, but you can do a lot there, and having the meekness and disciples and then just transfiguration, it just auto kind of rescues things. So that's all. I can't wait to see that in Type 2. That's all that's going to be. I think it's going to be once again, go back to the Old Testament, New Testament kind of thing. Do you use a Clay or Disciples? Do you use a Disciples offense or a Clay offense, because you can do a lot with Clay, and then play old school character like what Elijah and Moses, and what do you do there with Clay, because you have Cloud, Moses with all those cloud enhancements that are Clay too. It's gonna be good to see.
I will just say, if you want to drop any nuggets, we're all ears here too.
You've been getting nuggets left and right.
I do think that, like, with Moses and Elijah, obviously there's things that you can do with the current form of them. I just wonder if there's New Testament reference ones coming. That's all I want to know.
I didn't know. Is there a New Testament reference Moses and Elijah?
I don't know. They were there.
Oh, interesting.
It is very interesting.
I'll have to dig. I'll see what I can come up with. Maybe a future set, and maybe next set there's a New Testament Moses and Elijah. I don't know.
And I'm pretty sure I've read about them in the Bible, in the New Testament somewhere.
Are they in the Gospels?
That's a good question.
So if they aren't in the Gospels, then they can't be in the set, right?
I don't know. There's a plague of hell.
Next question, please.
I am looking forward to making a whole bunch of follower tokens and playing Impartial Judgment, though.
Yeah, I bet you are. I'm not looking forward to playing against it.
Having to get to 7 souls in Type 2 versus the 5, do you think that kind of has an approach from a player's perspective to where they play more thoughtfully, or is aggro still as big in Type 2 as it is in Type 1?
I've been blabbering. You go ahead, Jaden.
I know that Tyler said earlier that he was pretty aggro, but like, is that across the whole player spectrum, or is that just kind of a?
I mean, he also mentioned like Justin's play style of being a little bit more, kind of control, I guess, or where you're kind of playing more of a long game, and I think that's. I mean, Justin's obviously a very good player with lots of titles under his belt, so I think that's suggests that there's some validity to both strategies there. I'm not really sure which side I would say I lean more to. I like to try out different things, but
your aggro setup and methodical battle.
Could be, yeah. Maybe it's like the best of both worlds. I don't know.
I'd say Jaden's a little bit of both. I'm more aggro that likes to get more and more resources, but I like to limit your resources more. Jaden wants to get set up quick, but he knows what he has in his deck to where what he needs to get to in the game state he's looking for, and he is going to try to set that up. The quicker you can set up your game state, the better. And I've always been set it up as quick as I can and put pressure on you. Jaden does that as well, especially well this year. to where he's setting up, but he's getting to a game state that's pretty crippling and debilitating. And I'm more of the constant pressure. So I think those are two main
Yeah,
different play styles.
yeah, I could see that. That I think is definitely like if I were to think of a prime example of that is my game against Josiah in 2018, or was it 2018? Yeah. Uh, I'd have to pull up my resume again. um, no, it was 2019. That's right. Um, where it was just like I felt like I was in control the entire game, but he just had like chump block after chump block, and um, I wasn't applying enough pressure early on to like even where, or once we got to the point where I was in control and might have been able to get through given more time. We ended up timing out in that game, so it's definitely kind of like a finding a balance between um, those things that's important. And I think that what we're kind of seeing in Type 1 now, if of thinking about that, has been something that's been pretty consistent in Type 2, even before rotation and everything.
Josiah is a freight train. Do not let that man get momentum.
I can't beat Josiah in big tournaments, I guess.
He, I had him on tilt. I had him on the. I mean, we talked about this game, and he was like, I was sweating, I was shaking, and I came out to like a 4-0 start. I think I lost 7-3. Like he went to Covenant of Prayer into a Haman's Plot and Rip 2 against me, drew into a falling away, was able to set up his defense and just slowly like get the blocks he needed after Haman's Plot, and I just kind of was stuck for a little bit, and
Mm-hmm.
then just build everything. And I just saw the game. I saw like a 10-minute victory just diminish to a hour-long anaconda just slither around me and choke me out. It was so it pissed me off.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Do you think the win condition being 7 versus 5, do you think it has a major impact on the game? Obviously, it extends the game. You get a little bit more time to get to that. But you said like some of the same strategies are involved, and then you also have, what was the term you used earlier? Rescuer's choice. How does that play into it? And explain to people on this side of the aisle what that means.
Well, soul gen comes before the fact, meaning during a rescue, if you have no lost souls and I generate a lost soul, it doesn't matter. When you do rescuer's choice, you uh, say the lost soul you're going for and present your hero. If at any point that lost soul goes away, rescue attempt is not successful. So I cannot generate a soul after I attacked and it still be a rescue attempt. I have to name the lost soul I'm going for, and I can only rescue for that soul. So that changes things.
And
Uh,
that's not optional. That's mandatory for each rescue.
Correct.
What's a standard battle interaction look like? I know that's probably a loaded question because if you've had characters out there for 2 or 3 battles before, you're gonna have a bunch of rocks built onto them, looking like Stonehenge going into battle.
Yeah, the hardest part really is just picking up all the characters that you're trying to push in without losing track of all the experience credit that they have on them.
Or you ban to
Um,
someone else's,
yep.
and you're just like, just all yours are in, just all of them.
Yeah, yeah. I recommend dice. That's
Mm-hmm.
definitely something that took me a few years to figure out, but those tiny little dice, those are awesome for Type 2.
Little dice, different colors, because you try to not have the same colors as your opponent for dice, and then you put all those stones. Next thing you know, it looks like an aquarium by the time you're done playing. So don't use those. As for a normal battle,
That's not shade, Chris.
A little bit of shade.
as for a normal battle, Jade and I are going to play. We do play heavy characters, but we also try to do at least on the offense. We try to do a lot of banding. Um,
Hmm.
I'm not too focused on banding on defense. I'm more focused on adding to battle instead. But as from an offensive standpoint, I'm trying to maximize my resources, and I can do that through hero abilities now. And so you'll see the last couple decks that I've won in Type 2, really over the last, what I would say 4 years, between yours, Josiah's, and mine, that both of mine were just aggro. One was heavy thrown, one was just red aggro thrown. Josiah's was, I think it was thrown, but he was insteading things. He had some teal in there to
Yeah.
instead, and his was add to battle brown, add to battle offense and defense.
Well, that was in 2017. In 2019, he played Crimson with Throne.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I forgot he played Crimson. I always rely on add to battle. Last year I switched up a bunch of stuff, but that was just because I was my involvement in GOC, and I switched decks, and I add to battle's good.
Make
and
excuses all you want, Tyler.
Yeah, Jaden would have won regardless. I'm going to say that on record. Jaden would have won regardless. I'm saying my normal play style I went away from. And then Jaden was able to just throw a bunch of heroes in battle and get the Meek abilities off that. Not that Meek had any abilities, that's ironic, but the impartial judgment. So you'll see a lot more, which, I mean, Type 1 tries to do that. I think Type 1 does it more efficiently. Just throwing more heroes into battles, and the defense has to counter all of that.
Mm-hmm. I would say what I see a lot more in battles in Type 2 than, I mean, you do see it in Type 1, but I think a lot of the cards that I include, like especially on defense, will be cards that are like card advantage and not necessarily battle winners. Like, most of I guess like the only cards that I had in my deck this year on defense that like directly removed the hero in battle were 2 copies of Seized by Babylon, and then I guess like Betrayal and Wages of Sin could do that, and I guess technically Jealousy as well. But a lot of it are like Dream, where you're drawing cards. I mean, like Crimson as a whole is probably the most popular Type 2 defense in the last however many years. I mean, there's a lot of variety, like we were saying, but I think, Crimson, just because it had like Nebuchadnezzar, who was like super good in every category, every format, but in Type 2 especially, because you have so many different options you can include, and you can just get whatever you need the most. And so I think seeing a lot of those kind of like value plays on defense, especially because you can afford to give up a few more lost souls than in Type 1, as long as you're kind of like getting more value. I mean, so like seeing a deck with 4 copies of Sabbath Breaker, or like Lying Prophet, Damsel, like are things that it wouldn't surprise me to see lots of those kind of characters.
Let me ask you this, because you guys kind of mentioned that one of the pulls into Type 2 for you guys is that there really isn't a defined meta. You can kind of play what you want. But in a given year, so you said you guys kind of had a gentleman's agreement that you weren't going to play like Love at First Sight, even though that was a big thing in Type 1. When some big deck pops off in Type 1 for the first time, is it usually show up in Type 2, or is the different format just kind of completely like warp the ability for a deck to be present in both?
Well, I got the history side. You want me to take that one?
Go for it.
So there was the Devastator deck back in the day, and that was where a lot of rule changes came from side battles and cards like Book of Hosea and withdraw cards. So you would do a side battle, discard one card from their hand, and draw Book of Jasher, take another card from their hand. If you want, however you played it, you would withdraw Visions of Ido the Seer, Highway, whatever. Highway was a big one in there because you'd make a side battle in your side battle, but the side battle would be side battle of evil characters, vice versa, and everything could stay, and then you could withdraw. Highway would take the evil enhancements back as well, and you were able to get rid of their entire. You would cycle through, and once you had the combo, you were able to cycle through their entire hand, deck, whatever you wanted, and keep making side battles. That deck, when it came out, did extremely well, and then other people caught on and they made their own versions, and rules came out. The other one was the Speed Camp, was just, I was the guinea pig for that one for 3 years. I played against that one, and that was, I don't remember a lot of time during those 3 years, but it
It's all
became
hazy.
traumatic. But that was another one that Cliff straight up put the list out there, and no one else used it. Gabe used it and rightfully won. It
Hmm.
was the best deck out there, and um, I had a new beginning reset, and I used that, but I didn't post anything about that because I couldn't, because like I said, I made it in the terminal. Um, that one did extremely well. What other ones were there from a combo standpoint in Type 2? I made the Zebulon deck, and that was kind of to offset Cliff, and I made it. I won so many tournaments with that deck that people would stop playing me because that deck was just ahead of its time. So I just posted it on the boards, I think like 3 months before Nationals. And Gabe was like, well, there's a good deck. And he won Nationals. And I'm like, man, what if I could just pick the right deck? And Gabe piloted that thing to perfection. That was another deck, but I threw that thing out prior to. So I guess, I don't know. I think the community wise, I mean, Jaden said the same thing about Impartial Judgment. I knew what he was going to play. I didn't want to purposely go against him. I didn't think that was right. So I just threw in 2 crowds. And I don't even know if I had an artifact in there for you. I
You
think
want
I
to go
had one
purposely
artifact.
against me, so you just went a little bit against me.
Just slightly against, yeah. And so we both kind of agreed not to do Love at First Sight because we didn't really want to deal with counters. It wasn't fun. But so, yeah, there's definitely been combos. I guess the best person to do it is Kirk Dennison. He would make a combo. He would email Rob. Rob would say, yeah, this looks good to me. And then he would print off the email and show up at Nationals, and no one would know about it.
Yep.
I'll say from a Type 1 perspective, Children of Light, that was out prior to. Love at First Sight, shouldn't have been, but that was out prior to. So there hasn't been too many hush-hush. Like even John, when he played his Sight Lock and his Packer Backer, both of those were out there. So I don't. Jaden, do you have any? Is that like, I don't know what's really been hush-hush in years.
I mean, I think that getting back a little bit to like, if something comes out in Type 1, does it like immediately port into Type 2? I mean, I would say there's definitely been a lot more combo decks in Type 2 than in Type 1. Because I mean, you have more resources available. You can have multiple copies of certain cards. One of my videos in the next few weeks when I'm doing a classic Type 2 build, it's because you can have it's only possible in Type 2 because you can have more than one of a certain card. And so I think that there's like some more viability there for combo type stuff, and there's more time in the game to pull those kind of things off. And I think that as far as like if something comes out in Type 1, it's probably already been done, or it's pretty easy to build a Type 2 deck from any like good Type 1 deck. Going the other way around might not be quite as easy, but I could take like any Type 1 deck that I've played over the last year and build a decent Type 2 deck out of it. I think that it doesn't necessarily go both ways, but definitely from Type 1 to Type 2.
All right, and ladies and gentlemen, if you picked up on that, that was the subtle, shameless plug for Redemption with Jaden. So if you will be caller number 7 now, you will win Tyler's free box of Phase 1 GOC. You can't have Jaden on here without the shameless plug, or Derek. Everybody's got shameless plugs.
Except for Tyler. What are you doing, Tyler? Pull it together.
Well, he tried to plug what he was doing before we got on the call.
That's true, yeah.
I want that off the record.
We didn't hit the record button fast enough. Sorry, guys.
In all in due time.
I've been busy.
Yeah, definitely been busy. Anyway, so how do you guys see rotation affecting Type 2? Because when I looked over some of those games with Jay and Chris, and like that's the most of my that's as far as my type 2 interaction goes, because like at nationals you're not able to hover and watch any of the games, so I didn't get to see much there. So I just saw them at locals, well, not locals, but states, regionals, things of that nature. But you talk about multiple copies of Haman's Plot. You talk about all of the weapons that interrupt, draw two, play the next. You talk about a bunch of characters that are no longer allowed. So how do you think rotation kind of hits type 2?
I mean, the deck that I played at Nationals this year um, has, I think, 10 cards that are not rotation legal. Which, I mean, they're important cards for the deck. Like, definitely makes things a little bit different not having Joida, Son of Eliashib for, the little like combo that I was trying to do. But like overall, I think that there's still a lot of variety and different things to try out. To be honest, I haven't actually built a rotation type 2 deck yet. Um, so that's something I gotta work on here. But I think that it won't change a whole lot. I mean, like in the same sense that like type 1 is changing. There's like a couple themes that you won't really see as much. You won't see like throne, but I mean you can see it look a little bit different. I think like maybe like Purple King Unity or something. Zion. In type 1, maybe that's kind of a pretty medium strategy. But in type 2, I think that's certainly a viable strategy, especially in rotation. So I think that you'll see a little bit more, or I guess maybe kind of like the same amount of variety, just with some different themes. You'll see a little bit less of the shenanigans that Tyler was doing with his throne deck, with like 4 copies of a Soldier's Prayer and like 4 copies of the cards that really get you like value in type 2, like a Soldier's Prayer, like Nebuchadnezzar I brought up earlier. So that'll change things a little bit, but I don't think it's going to take it a whole lot. But like I said, I haven't built or even played rotation type 2 yet, so maybe Tyler, you've got a different perspective on that.
Yeah, rotation is going to be amazing for type 2. It's going to be amazing for the game. I don't know if this is the exact quote, but innovation is made through adaptation, meaning we were kind of stagnant in where we were at from a community. We're kind of making a lot. Jaden does a great job of, I try to pump out a lot of ideas too. Jaden's been doing a great job of content as well from like a meta standpoint. You can only do so much when some themes were too strong, when there's thousands of cards in the pool and cards like Throne of David and Isaiah exist and you can do a massive ban to them. It's forcing players, and once again, I'll say I'm guilty when I can make all the decks in the world. It's not until nationals that I'm like, well, what do I want to play? So, and I've always been more of a red aggro player. And I say red aggro, but let's be real, I throw Throne in there with a couple other guys. But rotation will force players to get out of their comfort zone, and I'll just say me in general. It will force players to play different types. I love my rotation deck. I'm gonna be honest, it does the same thing I've always done in a different way, in a brand new rotational way. But you are forced to look at things and play things that you might not have, and we're losing. It's not that we're losing so much, but we are losing key cards that we need to lose. There's a few, and once again, it comes back to crutches. The reserve was that crutch. There's other cards that were just those crutch. Like what is Jay going to play in type 2, because now he can't play Sam's Edicts. So Jaden used to play Sam's Edicts, and I mean we have Covenant with Death is gone, and there's a lot of cards that I think we aren't fully understanding what rotation looks like yet. And I definitely would urge people that even, yes, phase Phase 1 of GOC is coming out. I implore you to play some rotation and really looking at like a 60-40, 70-30 split of offense defense. Also look at it the other way of more defense, but from a type 2 rotational standpoint, it's going to create more variety because those few archetypes that have always been there are going to go away. Just the fact that we are forced to see the new Throne of David, some people probably don't even know what it does. So just the fact that we get to see the new Throne of David in a potential Zion build that is very fast, like Throne of David, Zion, Unity, Royal, you have add to battle all day. You have you have the add to battle and a setup extremely fast. You can figure out ways to win if you have add to battle and a fast setup. So there's new builds that are going to be that have always been good, but people haven't played because they haven't had to, because other decks were just simply better.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to go away. I think I've always said our community kind of lags sometimes from a deck building perspective, and I think we're really grasping LOC now. I know you might not agree with this, John, but I do think Genesis is good from other abilities, and Genesis are good, and we haven't seen a lot of Genesis decks. That's mostly Jaden's fault because he told everyone post-Exilics were good. So,
oops.
Yeah. So now people are running on that train, and everyone loved Ruth when it came out, and I think people still haven't really messed around with the Meek stuff. I always say Mary and John are good, and now we have Humble Seeker to help out everything too. So, or I'm Mary and John. Mary and Joseph are good.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot to do there with Meek. GOC is gonna really change things too, but rotation is gonna be amazing in competitive format and force people to play new things that are outside of their comfort zone.
Yeah, and I will mention Lightning Priest is I think looking pretty good in rotation. So Rob Smith, I know you're out there. You better get on that. You can build a teal type 2 or type 2 deck.
Treacherous Lands in there.
Yeah, you can have two of them.
Yeah. Hint. Look outside the box on Lightning Priest. Don't just stick to teal.
If he is an angel or 4.
There's a lot to do there.
So you mentioned you would implore people to get out and try to figure out what it was or what the game state is right now before phase 1 releases. And I've kind of been saying that as well. That like if you don't know what the meta is before GOC phase 1 releases, you're going to be like fish out of water, because where other people are trying to like fit those cards into what they know rotation already is, you're going to be like trying to figure out two different things at one time. And it's going to really, really scatter you. I won't keep us going too much further with this, but I will say rotation, it sounds like from the outside looking in, type 2, the way that it changes is kind of gets players out of, like you said, their comfort zone. Do you think that would create like a perfect, I guess, diving board into type 2 for a new player to come in kind of while everybody's learning and building new decks? Seems like it would make it a little bit easier.
Jaden, would we ever say no to that? But yeah, now's the best time.
I guess I was just thinking about the fact that maybe we should probably start posting a few like more contender deck type 2 decks where they're like maybe a little bit budget, a little simpler than the the type 2 decks you see in like the national tournament winners, part of the forums. And I think that might help or give people an idea of type 2, or kind of like dip their toes in the water with decks that are maybe a little bit more straightforward, battle focused, before getting into the resources all across the table, and things just kind of scattered all over the place. So that's probably something we could do a little bit of a better job of doing.
Yeah, we can. There's a main takeaway. Look at all the dual brigade cards that came out over the last few years. Go look at your collection. I'm going to guarantee you that you have 1 to 2 of those. and look at all the 3 brigades and more. You can only play with one of those in Type 2. I guarantee you, people out here that just have a normal set of redemption cards can make a competitive Type 2 deck, especially in rotation, because there's so many dual brigade cards. And really the meta in Type 2 shifted from using 4x of everything into more of, and Jade and I are big proponents of this, of using one-ofs. Justin used to use one of certain heroes, and he still had his main enhancements that he liked, and then he would have a couple one-ofs for when he needed things. And then it started going into 2-ofs and 1-ofs. So I can just have one of these, and then I would have, of course, 4 soldiers' prayers, but I'm having 1 and 2 of all these. So you can look at right now all the dual brigades and tri brigades, and you can see, oh wow, I actually already have a competitive Type 2. I didn't even know I had the cards.
Right, yeah. My Type 2 deck this year, can either of you guess the hero that I had 2 copies of in the deck?
It's a Robo.
Come on, man.
I know it's
Joshua.
I know what it was. I wasn't going to give you the satisfaction.
Yeah, that was the only hero that I had 2 copies of in the deck, and one of them was in reserve. And other than that, it's just one-ofs, and I think that's pretty common now for Type 2, especially like unique characters. I mean, most of it's because there's a lot of ways to search for them. Like, I mean, if I was running a Judge's deck, I probably still have at least 2 Angel to the Oaks in main deck, and then 1 reserve. Obviously, classic. But it kind of depends on the importance of the hero and what you're doing with it, or even the character. Some evil characters, like I had 2 Nebuchadnezzars. But other than that, like most characters at least are going to be one-ofs. A lot of your enhancements are multi-brigades, so they're going to be 1 or 2. And that, like, I think is not something that you should necessarily be too worried about if you're like, oh, how am I ever going to get 4 copies of this? Well, I guess you can't do Zerubbabel, but how am I ever going to get 4 copies of like Jonah, or somebody that you think is like really good in your Type 1 deck? So you got to have as many as possible so you get them out. Like, there's lots of ways to search for them and get out what you need. And so just doing one-ofs is actually gonna be better, because then you're not like wasting space. Because if you get your 1 Jonah in your opening hand, then every other one that you draw is going to be a dead card, because you can only have 1 of a unique character out at a time.
And not to kind of speculate on something that I don't really know about as far as Type 2, but it seems like with Meek Souls also becoming playable, like that'll eventually trickle down and show up in Type 2, right? Which makes it, you don't have to have two remnants, 2 exiles. You don't have to have all the expensive cards. It would be cheaper ones that you could play with, because eventually Meek Souls would be in Type 2 as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, the manual, I mean, he's a big, if you think about a Daniel deck, like Emmanuel's name is going to probably pop up in your head, because he plays Daniel a lot, and he actually used Meek Daniel Souls, which I guess right now they're kind of cost prohibitive. Meek Law Souls in that particular strategy is maybe not where you want to start with, but he actually did use a Kings of Judah defense with it, which I think Tyler talked him into, if I'm not mistaken. Instead of using a Daniel defense, he used Kings of Judah, and it seemed like it was pretty effective against
everyone else.
Most people.
It did great against everyone else.
He made like a pretty crucial mistake in like kind of the first 1 or 2 turns against me, and he also just like never found Foretelling Angel until it was like way too late in the game.
Yep, he never got his offense going.
I mean, I was really scared to play him because my defense hinges a lot on Nebuchadnezzar, and Daniel offenses are obviously going to shut that down.
So he was really needing crowd's choice to get to his Foretelling Angel.
Absolutely.
So let's recount, I guess, things that I've learned from this conversation, even if they were just passing by nuggets. So, you if they're tri brigade, you can only have one of. If
Yep.
they're dual brigade, you can have two. Single
Yep.
brigade, you can have up to 4 copies. You can have up to 2 copies of a soul, 1 copy of a dominant, 3 copies of an artifact. And then I'm guessing if it's a covenant, then it would be based on your brigades on the good enhancement
Yeah.
side. And then the curse would be the same thing, whether you can have 2 or 3 falling into that dual brigade or tri brigade.
Yep. It's
Um,
whichever is most limiting. So if it's got 2 brigades, you can have two because it's only 2 good enhancements. But if it's a single brigade covenant, you can have three because then it's limited by the artifact side.
and then you can have or well, what you guys said that you play with, you don't necessarily double on the heroes and things of that nature. You kind of play around. I think the numbers were like 16, between 16 and like 18 generally. So this is just to show that from a, I would say, a quick conversation, but like we've been talking for a while now. But so just picking up on all of that, and now that gives me a little bit of X's and O's on that I can go for if I'm thinking about playing type 2. Nothing seems overwhelming, and it seems like with rotation, after you guys started talking about that and all the cards that are like out of the way, that because I remember seeing those cards with all the weapons that interrupt, draw two, and all of that, like not having to deal with that now because those are gone. Rotation comes in. It seems like it's almost a perfect time to jump in because it's more of a clean slate.
Mm-hmm.
What advice, as the final point for the conversation here tonight, what what would be the point that you would give to someone that, whether they've whether they've never wanted to try type 2 and they're listening to this, and now kind of some of those things are being, their eyes are being opened towards like what the format is, um, and then maybe somebody that really wants to try out, and we've kind of taken down some of the barrier of the cost things. What advice would you give to someone that's just like wanting to get started? Like, where would you start at?
I would say just try it. Don't just, if you have someone around you that plays type 2, ask them for a deck. Can I just play type 2? Don't even worry about the deck building. If you don't have someone that is around you, look at your type 1 and just see, hey, what would this, don't even look at the defense. Chances are you're playing some sort of crazy defense anyway. Just look at the offense and see, what can I do with this if I can just double up on everything?
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't put your creativity outside of the box. Don't put yourself inside of a box, but just go out and try it. So many people tell me, and this goes for life in general, but let's stick to the topic, is, oh, I can't do that. And it's like, oh, have you tried it? No. Okay. Just try type 2. Just do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think like if I would start with your type 1 deck, whichever one you're probably most familiar or comfortable with playing. And, you can either put in multiples of certain cards that you think are pretty important. You can also put in some cards that are like, like, oh, this card, kind of was the last one on the chopping block before I, cut it in order to get down to 50 or, 56 or whatever. And then put those in and kind of, see if you can get it between like 35 and 40 cards for your offense. And then, defense, you can kind of, do the same thing. And, you can just double up on all the lost souls. It's pretty easy. And, then you're pretty much already there and you have a type 2 deck, and, it doesn't have to be pretty and doesn't have to be, very good right off the bat. But yeah, I think just, trying it out, it does take a little bit more patience, I guess. Like, the games are a little bit longer. But I think it's, worth it for, the play experience. And I think it's, I mean, I would say it's a lot of fun, but that's also coming from a guy who enjoys type 2 multiplayer. So, I mean, that's take it with a grain of salt. But yeah, I wouldn't be, I mean, Tyler mentioned earlier that the type 2 games, a lot of times won't time out because in part because it's a lot of experienced players playing it, and don't let that detract you, I guess, from giving it a try, being like, oh, I'm not going to do well at all, or like I'm just going to take too long. Like, I mean, I think we're going to also be there, like helping you here. Like, we want you to get into it. Let me know if anyone wants to try out Type 2 over Lackey or something. I'm certainly willing to figure out a time to play on there. And I think that that's uh, one of the things that yeah, I think is super important. Just give it a try, like Tyler said.
And just to revisit the shameless plug here, you did state that you are planning to do some Type 2 on your channel here towards the end of the year, right?
That's the plan. Yeah, I kind of have a few decks that are actually classic decks that I want to get out of the way, get out there. Um, that some of them that have like been mentioned before or like brought up before in other cases, but not on the channel. And I kind of want to just have like, I don't know, evidence of them, so to speak. And then also ones that are kind of like brand new, even though they're classic. That it's just like, oh, this is something that technically still exists in the game to some degree. And I just want to get it out there before GOC is all the rage, and I'm going to be focusing most of my videos on that.
Cool. Maybe even if you want to in the future, not kind of force your hand here, but if you want to um, do like an intro like you did with the starter decks, if you want to do that with Type 2, maybe I could throw something together and try it out.
Ooh.
Since
So,
maybe you guys have made it seem a little easier to get into,
so you're
so that
saying,
like there's some fruit to your labor here tonight.
yeah, you're saying that the goal of the podcast has been accomplished. Maybe.
I definitely think it's worth giving it a try.
What I could do is take IJ, and we've done this before, take IJ, take out one of the brigades on defense for a Type 2 perspective, and just make IJ a Type 2 deck, and just kind of throw that out there, at least the deck list, to where someone can just copy and paste into Lackey. So they just have a build, a starter deck build. And I only say take out one of the brigades because the ratios are a little off. And for Type 2, you don't want to have, what would you have? I don't know, 6 evil characters of one brigade and 4 of another, or something like 7 and 4 of one, or that's not that low, but it'd be weird brigades for you trying to play defense, and maybe just throw in a couple other basic cards. But that's an easy project of starter decks for Type 2 that you can just throw in Lackey.
Yeah, I've actually I did Type 2FI, I guess, one of the contender decks that I built for Derek. It's not on the website, but it was kind of for like someone who reached out to Derek about getting into Type 2, so I put that together. So it's something that I'm actually wanting to work on a little bit more, and talking to Derek about. I think he's kind of on board having a couple of rotation contender Type 2 decks that obviously they're going to be a little bit pricier because it's just more cards, but Derek's always pretty good about making sure that decks like that are have a good sale on them and everything, or a good deal.
And here's the other shameless plug for your turn games right here. All of number 7. So I guess with that, we'll just wrap up the conversation here. Definitely appreciate you guys coming on and kind of giving I don't know, opening up the the wormhole of Type 2 to kind of like pull back some of the layers of like I don't know what a new player sees, or like what I saw initially, like 100 card decks. It kind of almost turns you off just because it seems complicated and expensive. But then once you start getting into it and unpacking it seems like it could be a worthwhile. I won't say that it is worthwhile because I haven't played it, but I could see myself trying it now.
So
So
does that mean you're going to go back and watch my Type 2 videos?
Maybe. I don't know if I have 2.5 hours.
Type 2 online's a little different, but everything online's a little different.
Yeah.
Type 2 in person's so much more fun.
Like searching on Lackey is just like in Type 2, I kind of wish I just had like a Control F like in Lackey
Yep.
to search.
Yeah. So definitely appreciate you guys coming on, and we'll go ahead and end it here, and we'll see you guys next week.
Sounds
Peace.
good. Thanks a lot, John.
Well, that's it. Another episode of your favorite podcast is in the books. We want to thank Tyler and Jaden both for coming on and sharing some of their insight and wisdom into Type 2. And we hope that you enjoyed this overview, and perhaps it's something that you want to look into possibly giving a try in the future. You never know if you're going to like it if you don't try it. So go ahead and give it a try, guys. I'd also like to take this time to let you know that this is the last week for signups for the Christmas card swap. By the time next week's episode drops, it will be too late. Signups will be closed. So make sure that if you want to participate, you reach out to me via DM and provide me with your name and address, and I'll get you added to the list. Signups do close Monday of next week. So, and then in the couple of days after that, we'll split up and swap the addresses around and provide you all individually. We'll reach out and provide you with the address where you can send your cards to. So thank you for participating in that if you are, and if you want to sign up, go ahead and do so now, and we'll look forward to seeing you all next week. Appreciate you being here. Peace.